Welcome to the broadcast, everyone. Well, here in the kingdom, it's all go, go, go. We've got a new king. We've got a new prime minister. This is the new age of the Carolean. So we've got to get on with it. We've got to pick ourselves up, dust ourselves down, and continue in that vein. Now, I actually recorded this broadcast, or a similar version of it, not long after the Queen's funeral on the early hours of Tuesday morning, because I was exhausted from that day, from the weekend, the preceding week, and I was sort of exhausted, but and you're super wired. So I made a broadcast for you in the early hours, and I was in full mourning regalia. But what I didn't realise is that the fabric that made up my mourning attire was extremely rustly, and it was picked up by the microphone throughout the whole thing. It was very, very irritating to me, even just listening it back in the edit. So I decided not to use it. But I made it really about you, which is what I'm going to do today. Your tributes that you've left me, comments in their proliferation, in their thousands coming in. I've just plucked a few at random, to be honest. There's so many amazing ones, I don't know where to start. So I'm going to be reading those through to you, really. It's more of a check-in kind of broadcast than anything too thrilling. Although I will touch on the Harkles first of all for a couple of minutes. I'm not going to dwell on them this week, but I know some of you wanted my opinion on the Harkles at the funeral, so I'm going to offer that. And I'm also going to just mention the subscriber count past 100,000, as some of you have noted. I must admit, it's much of a muchness to me. I don't care about the whole subscriber number thing. I find it a bit vulgar and was never going to bring it up. The only reason I am being vulgar enough to bring it up is because, and please don't leave a million congratulations about it. I am very grateful for every individual viewer, but the marker means nothing to me. The reason I'm bringing it up is because I passed that mark. For those of you who might believe in signs or good omens, or just happy coincidences, I passed it not only on the day of Her Majesty's funeral, but not just the hour, but the moment, but the precise minute that Her Majesty's body was received at Windsor Castle after Westminster Abbey. That's quite something, isn't it? I created this channel to defend the Queen, to defend her people, her nation, her family, and if I was to think that it was more than just coincidence, then, if I was in the mood for indulging that sort of imaginative element, then I could indulge myself and see those piercing blue eyes looking down on me, giving a little wink and saying, job well done, River. Job well done. So, good timing. Very good timing. Now, Harkle business. Let's get this Harkle nonsense out of the way. It's always fun to be more salty, isn't it? It's always fun to find out what mischief they've been up to and have a good whinge about it. But I am not going to do that just to appease some of you who were very critical about them at the funeral. Putting the Windsor Castle episode aside, when they came out and picked up flowers on Her Majesty's behalf, which I thought was revolting. They didn't deserve to be there doing that, but they were invited. Okay, there we go. For the rest of the week, they could have been a lot worse. As far as I'm concerned, they behaved. As far as I'm concerned, they could have got up to a lot more mischief. I'm sure behind the scenes, perhaps they are. Who knows what's to come? Who knows how they're going to take advantage of all this ceremonial business and what's happened. So it's not going to be sunshine and roses for long. I get that. But as for the day of the funeral, and as for Megala, the Duchess of Lies, I have nothing but praise for her for that day. I thought she was impeccable. And no, I'm not being paid by Sunshine Sacks. I can get over it. No, this isn't some puff piece. I give praise where praise is due, or credit at least. And I thought she looked impeccable. Some of you hated the cape and thought it was over the top. I thought it was chic, with a little touch of drama, and there's nothing wrong with that as far as I'm concerned in mourning attire. I like a little touch of drama. You might have noticed. So I thought that was fine. People said she had her hands in her pockets. They complained to me. I did a bit of a double take at first. I wasn't watching it live, but when I looked back at clips later on, I can see why people might have thought that at first. But from what I can see, and forgive me if I'm wrong, it was the shadow of the gloves and the cape. It was the shadow that made her look like she put her hands in her pocket. But when I saw that moment, she shifted and the light changed, and I could see that absolutely not. Her hands were clasped in front of her. I don't believe that she meant anything other than to give a respectful show that day. Now, the famous teardrop that was coaxed out of her. What coaxed it out of her, we don't know. Was it a tear, or was it some mosquito in her eye, or some green fly? Conjunctivitis? I don't know, my dear. I find it hard to believe that she was sobbing solely for Her Majesty or solely for the plight of the royal family this week, and definitely not in any kind of regret and remorse. I think it was more feeling sorry for herself, perhaps. But maybe that is too harsh. Who knows? Maybe for her beloved husband. One can only guess. But I actually agree with Tom Bower. So for those of you who think that it's just me being a softie, well, many of your hero, Mr. Tom Bower, I saw him on television saying the same thing that I'm saying, which is that she didn't grandstand. She could have grandstanded a lot more than that during the funeral and put on a bit of a snarky, smarmy show. I mean, there's always things that you can pick up if you're really rooting them out. As we heard at the funeral, Her Majesty was famed for her Christian values of looking for the good in people, and I certainly fall short of that. I look for the good, certainly, but I'm also, very aware of being suspicious and maybe a bit cynical about people as well. And I'm taking the lessons from Her Majesty as a true practice of mine to be more willing to seek out the good, because if you seek out the bad in people, you'll find it. Sophie Wessex, she doesn't put a foot wrong, and she was utterly royal and regal throughout the whole thing. If you really wanted to, someone out there, I'm sure, I'm just giving her as an example of a shining paragon of golden royalty. Love her to bits. If someone wanted to, they could pour over footage of her from that day at one point, her facial expressions, her every move, her every glance and interaction, and they could find something that they could call out as wicked. I'm sure they could, my dear, and turn it and put a spin on it. It can be done. So I'm sure there's things about measure that people will find and can find to complain about, but I'm afraid in the spirit of that day, and just my own honest opinion, to be honest, is that there wasn't anything harsh that I could pluck out from what I saw. I thought she gave a respectful, impeccable show. A little bit too heavy on the smoky eyes there, maybe, but I'm sure other members of the royals were going in for that. It's not like the old days when they turned up virtually plain-faced. So I have to be conscious of that. But all I'm saying, my dear, it could have been a lot worse. So there we are. So I'm going to read out a few comments from beloveds all over the globe, the Commonwealth, American Fruity Tooties, Tutti Fruities, and beyond, India, blah, blah, blah. Just to give a nice sort of bit of representation. Kathleen Luke says, Americans also truly loved and respected Queen Elizabeth. Our British cousins are so fortunate for having the best form of human government on earth. And this is a bit of a repeated theme throughout these questions and remarks. Please know that although, like any nation, we like to hear how great our ways are, how wonderful our lands are. All nations like to hear that, don't they? It's one quick way to our hearts. So while I'm reading out these articles full of praise for our monarchy and our systems, please know that I am well aware that many Americans would be horrified by that and are perfectly happy with their way, don't want anything to do with monarchy, and naughty old cousins you overthrew and abolished the monarchy centuries ago and wouldn't have it any other way. So I do understand that. I do know that. So please, no protests. Nothing is more perfect than that, and I wish America had become a constitutional monarchy like Canada and Australia. Even still, we feel your loss and we pray for King Charles. May he have a long and successful reign. God bless the United Kingdom and God save the King. Much love to all of you from all of America. So thank you, Kathleen. You're speaking on many of your American counterparts' behalf because so many comments and questions have echoed your thoughts. And I agree with you that it is the best form of human government in the world. And, I don't care what people in other countries think as much as what I think has been so healthy is to have it shown to the youngies coming up now. Because they can see, and one of the great criticisms is It's an unelected head of state, and it's fusty, old and archaic. What you can see this week is King Charles coming to fruition overnight as one of the most modern, thinking, progressive heads of state in the world. Yes, he represents our ancient tradition, and you've had the beauty of that revealed, the beauty that is getting lost in the modern world. Everything's becoming like some kind of human resources meeting in a stale old office in Slough, some kind of management meeting. Well, yes, our country brings some beauty to constitutional proceedings. We're not the only country that do that. I'm not saying we're the only ones, but it does the beauty and the pomp and circumstance in a pretty unrivaled way, doesn't it? And it also shows how healthy it is for the pride of a nation. And it's shown the young ones here that it is a living, breathing, evolving organism. That is the wonderful thing. It is not stale. It is not a set-in-stone constitution. It is organic, and it grows like one of the cultivated plants of Prince Charles at Highgrove, with him whispering in their ear every morning, talking to the plants. It is exactly, that is a metaphor for the way that it hugs around the framework of all our institutions, be that religious, political, whatever you want to say, my dear. It hugs all of those things. It hugs the people of all stripes. And, King Charles, for example, a lot of older people are unimpressed with him for his liaisons with Camilla back in the day. Fair enough, that's their right. The young ones coming through, as long as they don't pay too much attention to Netflix and The Crown, there'll be the odd distraction. But a lot of them don't equate him, don't tie him, don't associate him with that in the same way, with the profound sort of emotional feelings that went with that. And what I'm hearing is that they have learned and are associating with him with all the forward-thinking, progressive steps he took throughout his time as Prince of Wales. And I know that a lot of what he does is seen as meddling and controversial, but much of what he's done and much of what he stood for before he became sovereign and realised his role changes is hugely approved of by the young ones coming through who see him as someone who was a visionary of his time. And he was. And I'm not saying that he got it right every time, but I would say for the majority of time, actually, yes, well done. He should be highly, highly praised for being active and not just some passive member of the royal family that just goes along and does the job and 9 to 5 sort of punch in punch out kind of mentality. He lives and breathes it. He's a workaholic. He does his homework, and he's constantly looking for ways to try to improve, grow, as he done with the Prince's Trust and the Duchy of Cornwall. And I've been thinking this to myself recently, not diminishing a single moment of the Queen's life and her work. We all know that she's shouldered that burden for 70 years plus. So has Charles. And I would actually whisper it to you. I would go as far as to say he might have even done more when you think about the work that goes into, well, yes, the Prince's Trust, obviously. Tireless work for the Prince's Trust, benefiting millions out there. Throughout the globe, goes on, I think, 19 countries. Also, but his duchy as Duke of Cornwall, the Duchy of Cornwall. We've spoken before about documentaries that have been made, that exist online and on Netflix, that do a really good job of highlighting how rich that work is, and how closely linked it is with the peoples of this country, and how that in itself shoulders a great deal of responsibility. Which now Prince William will have to take on. It's got a lot of gravity. Manon Spring says, the priest at my Catholic church prayed for the Queen and her family during Mass. It was so beautiful for the leaders of our church to pray for Queen Elizabeth and acknowledge her sacrifices and the phenomenal good she's done to the world. I pray and ask for blessings for my Anglican friends, the British people, the British royalty, the Christians around the world, the Jewish people, the Muslim people, and all people good, bad, or in between. We must appreciate, though, that there's a Christian monarchy that is doing a lot of good. I've lived in countries whereby Christians are martyred and live under oppression. We should not complain about the monarchy because our Christian governments, i.e. the Constitution, is based on Christianity, and various Christian monarchies do protect us from communism and possible other dictatorship style of governments, globalists included here. Of course, it's not perfect, but it's exponentially better than being oppressed by governments that ban us from following our faith. Well, you raise a very good point indeed, and I like the fact that you raised Christianity, which has been unfashionable for so much time now. And just as I think people have a need for the familiar, they have a need to follow families and dynasties, which we'll talk about in a moment, they also have a need to deify humans, and you see this all through life. And something that has been missing from the spiritual soul of this nation for the past few decades is the decline of the Christian faith. And growing up as I did in the Church of England, I know it very well. There's been periods in my life where I was very disillusioned with it, and other times where I've found it illuminating. But I do believe that the nation was stronger when it had a Christian structure. I do believe that 100 years ago, when there were many more parish, village churches, when there was, no distractions of the modern world. So you had your Sunday school, you had church, and you knew the vicar, more tea vicar, invite him in for a cup of tea, which brought along much more of a sense of togetherness and community and neighbourliness. Some of that has also vanished just because the modern world is not so clement towards some of those community activities. It's just the progress of time and the way that society and people have changed. But religion, and the Christian faith in particular, was a backbone of that. And, wherever there's religion of any kind, there's a strong community and a sense of faith that helps one along with national pride. And one of the huge challenges King Charles has is that we are now, after 70 years of the Queen, a much more multicultural and diverse society. And he, I'm delighted to say, is to be defender of the faith, which I think is wonderful, instead of faiths. But as sovereign, he also understands that he represents all faiths out there, and there is beauty in so many different faiths. He knows this very well. He knows each religion very well. He knows the leaders and the heads of all these various religions that you mentioned, my dear, from the Jewish to the Muslim, Hindu, Sikh, Buddhist. We have them all here. Some more underrepresented than others, actually. And he is the perfect person. He is the perfect person to be able to deal with this enormous challenge of trying to unify and bring together a nation and a sense of pride under so many different belief systems, and under a government and a legal system which is inspired by the Christian faith, and hopefully always will be. But, the queue of mourners is a living illustration of all the stripes of this land. All the religions, the creeds, the colours, everyone. That is an illustration of how beautiful it can be and how serene it can be if it is captured responsibly with a feeling of respect for all. And as captain of the ship, I think King Charles will do as good a job as anybody can do through what is and is going to probably increase in being increasingly choppy waters out there when it comes to matters of faith, and having a head of state that in some way, even though he is Christian, has to be able to fairly represent all peoples of his nation. It's almost an impossible task to do, but I believe that he is in prime position to do it better than anybody else, and I would challenge any other multicultural nation and multi-faith nation, and let's not forget those without faith, secularism. I would challenge any other nation to find a head of state that is so well qualified to be able to pull it off. Let's hope that he does. Aquarius 54. I will always remember our dear Queen, along with Paddington Bear, gently tapping their spoons on the teacups. She had that wonderful cheeky grin on her face to start up the wonderful Platinum Jubilee. happy for her to have experienced just how much we loved her. Thank you, Aquarius54. And I wanted to slot that in just to say, wow, isn't it great that, yes, she lived to see that 70th Jubilee celebration. The actual anniversary was some months before, but to have that big celebration and have her alive, thank God, she could have kicked the bucket just as it was approaching. Can you imagine that tragedy? We got to say our thanks en masse, and she got to feel that stirring energy as she walked onto the balcony, and must have been bowled over with the absolute love and affection that our peoples had for our Queen. So I thought that was fabulous as well, my dear. And you mentioned, didn't you, Paddington Bear, because, that was such a genius moment, very similar to the James Bond moment in its conception and in its execution. Flawless work, flawless acting from the Queen, Oscar-worthy acting, even for those little glimpses, those little moments. So charming, so well timed, and I think that moment when Paddington came out with "Thank you, ma'am, for everything," whatever it was he said, yeah, "Thank you, ma'am, for everything." You're very welcome. That said it for all of us. So many people have said, grown butch men of stolid stoicism, were reduced to little puddles of tears. It left a lump in everybody's throat. Paddington said it for us. Thank you, Paddington Bear, my dear. You and your marmalade are blessed creations, my dear. Desert Cat, American here, but my heart seems to love England and the monarchy. Your tribute was wonderful and touching. Teary eyes for the second day now for a woman of history that showed us all how to be decent and understand respect and duty. Yes, decency. Decent. It's one of those words people have been saying that you don't hear much about goodness. People who are good like the Queen as a quality, as a desirable quality, but good and decent. We can't all live up to her standards. I certainly fall short of them here and there, but it's wonderful to have someone who you can look up to as a role model in that day, isn't it? And someone that's a true icon, And I do it as much as everyone else. They're an icon, she's an icon, blah-de-blah, icon. No, my dear, Elizabeth was a living, breathing icon. Throughout the world, the most famous person in the world, the most photographed person in the world, I would say the most beloved in the world. There are people that can say, the Pope, this, that, and the eighth. I think it was the Queen, and that's just how I feel about it. I just feel she was the best, the most beloved worldwide. And apparently this funeral will be the most watched event in the world. They're saying over 4 billion. I don't know. And yes, true icon, most photographed, stamps, coinage all over the world, everything. So the actual physical icon of her, that famous profile, the hairdo that was never changed, barely changed in 70 years, that hairdo of hers. And an icon and a role model of decency to look up to in a way that is, that's what I think people are saying that they're going to sorely miss. The fact that she harked back to that sort of ladylikeness of days past and post-war Britain. And just as we've mentioned before, the press have been throwing up the question about an unelected head of state, why that flies in countries like Britain, and I've addressed that before. But another element to that I've seen quite a few commentators bring up this week, including, Douglas Murray. People have been speaking about nations' need for a sort of family line, a lineage, and I'll use America as an example because you don't find, what you find in America and you don't find here are political dynasties. Political dynasties. That is so rare as to be almost obsolete here. You don't have sort of sons and daughters of prime ministers, or very rarely, that sort of hereditary line. That's all wrapped up in our monarchy. That takes care of our need to see a sort of familial line, and we're lucky enough to have one that is non-partisan and neutral. Whereas in America, sorry to keep referring to America, but it is the leader of the Western world. It sort of was the new empire last century after the fall of the British Empire. I hope and pray that its power and influence as leader of the free nation will last and last and last. Our great ally, but who knows what the future will bring. But their dynasties are in politics. It's so interesting to think about it, whether it's the Kennedys, the Clintons, Obama's everybody's interested. Will Michelle run? The Trumps, people are pushing and pushing for Donald Trump Jr. to run. The Bushes, of course. I could go on and on and on. That is something that Americans seem to relish, having that family lineage, whereas we don't here at all. We have no interest in that. We have no interest in who's coming up or in the families of our prime ministers here at all. That attention goes on the royal family. It's like everyone wants to hold up the family as a macrocosm as compared to us as the little people, our microcosms, and see it reflected in the family. So we have that with a neutral head of state, whereas other societies, nations, and not just America, their dynasties, dynasties are also in Eastern countries as well. Their dynasties are wrapped up politically. And I'm not sure, but personally, I don't find that as healthy and certainly not as meritocratic. Vanya Mahadev. The Queen was always my favourite royal, and I'm so saddened by her death. It feels like a part of history died with her. At 51, she was the only monarch I ever knew growing up. Being an Indian, she was the only one that mattered. Was never much of a fan of Charles. But watching him deliver his speech as king, I was very impressed with his eloquence and composure. He was brilliant. I believe he's going to surprise everyone. God save the king, and R.I.P. our beloved Elizabeth for a life so well lived. God bless. Yes, well, it's not that he's going to surprise everyone, my dear. King Charles has already shocked and stunned everybody by his grip on the public imagination already. It was a seamless week. It was a seamless transition, and so much of it planned, so much of it ruthlessly planned over decades, which is why it hit the ground running. But there was always going to be that element that you could not plan, and that was the reception to everything that was going on. And after 70 years, there was a lot of worry and a lot of concern. And, there's still worry and concern. We don't know how things are going to pan out. Charles will always be under a hell of a lot of scrutiny, some of it fairly, for his behaviour, things in the past. He's always going to be held to account, and I think he's going to face a hell of a lot of controversy. People out there still want to pull down not just him, but the monarchy and the British way of life. So he's got a lot of hurdles to overcome. But certainly, initially, it's just got off to the best start that one could ever hope for and imagine. And all of Elizabeth's glories are raining down on him in the form of support and that need to fill the vacuum that was left, the emptiness that people need to fill in their souls. He's being welcomed and embraced as Elizabeth would want him to be. So it's really very, very powerful. And yes, I've been so impressed with his eloquence as well, and his composure, showing just the right sort of touch of emotion for everybody to be able to feel compassionate towards him, not too robotic and too remote, giving us a lot of warmth and a little touch of emotion without overdoing it. Such a fine balance to strike, and he struck gold as far as I'm concerned. Far Queen 78. I'm so thankful as a little girl I got to briefly meet Her late Majesty in New Zealand. My grandmother pulled me out of school for the day, dressed in my best, and gave me a bunch of roses to give her should she stop at us. I'll never forget it. God save the Queen. Yes, I had quite a lot of stories from people out there who met Her Majesty all over the Commonwealth in gorgeous New Zealand, as you did. And another person that said this, by the way, was a lady from Perth in West Australia, Cheryl Vardy. Sounds like a footballer's wife, my dear. That's not an insult, but we have a Cheryl Cole and Rebecca Vardy, so it's a bit of an amalgamation. Cheryl Vardy, I recall clearly a memory seeing Her Royal Highness, you've said, I think you mean Her Majesty, as I was hoisted on my father's shoulders as a 7-year-old in 1954, standing front row as the cavalcade drove slowly by in Perth. The memory has never diminished. A beautiful lady, bathed in an aura of light as her jewels reflected on the white fur stole she wore. With each fairy tale read after that day, the memory would come to mind, the almost blinding light, the reflection surrounding a genuine, beautiful smile as she tilted her head and raised her hand to wave at the crowd as it gathered. A life of service A promise given by a young queen that she never wavered from. A rest so truly deserved by the side of her beloved husband. Well, thank you so much for that comment, Cheryl dear. And the reason I brought it to your attention is because you mentioned the glitz, the glamour, wet with diamonds, as she was when you were 7 years old. Back in 1954, she was a new, young queen. Ultra glamorous, beautiful, with that dazzling smile, as well as all the accoutrements and the fancies, all the glories of the day. She also had that naturally beautiful smile, didn't she, which was charm itself, and those blue eyes. Gorgeous. But isn't it wonderful that memory you have was emblazoned and imprinted onto your mind by those glories, by those so-called superficial artifices that dazzle, the jewels and the white furs, everything there to dazzle you and imprint that memory into your 7-year-old mind, so that all these years later, all these decades later, it's right there. There's a reason that not everything has to be beige and like some boring conference centre in Slough. Pageantry, circumstance and pomp, they have their place and they are very powerful. And wasn't it wonderful, that moment at the funeral where the Dean of Windsor placed the sceptre and the orb and the crown, took them off of Her Majesty's coffin and laid them on the cushions to signify the end of her reign before breaking the stick. So beautiful, so dazzling, and they are not just symbols of wealth. In fact, that's the last thing that they are, in my mind anyway. They all symbolise something very meaningful to this nation and to the monarchy and to the Commonwealth. All three of those objects have their meaning. They're dripping in history, dripping in meaning, and they make such a glorious visual that it's unforgettable and strong. They are iconic in themselves, and I'm afraid it just wouldn't resonate the same way if they were formed in brass or wicker and wood or something recyclable. This is why I'm a great fan of theatre and glamour and a little bit of drama. Catherine Helm. River, I just watched coverage of King Charles's arrival at Buckingham Palace, and he got out the car to greet people lined up, and he went down the whole line shaking hands with everyone without gloves. You could see by their faces the respect they had for him, and I was so proud of him going down that line, and the look on his face was of true caring for his people. I loved your words about him. Thank you. I'm glad you recognise that, my dear. And what I've got to say is, yes, he pulls off a trick, because even if someone was good at pretending to be sincere and pretending to be caring about his people, how can you do that when you are literally addressing and speaking and meeting with thousands of people, all kinds of people in a queue like that? It would be an impossible trick to pull off, and it just shows his authenticity that shines through. Yes, he does. He deeply cares about his people because he's met all kinds of people and he hasn't been cloistered away. And whether it's his own tenants under the Duchy of Cornwall that are everyday people, agricultural people, that he goes around and personally visits, by the way. This is in documentaries about the Duchy of Cornwall. Goes round to their house, visits them, brings them personalised Christmas cards with his own watercolour paintings printed on there. And, whether it's handwritten letters to the mother of Jamal Edwards, Brenda, who died a few months ago in tragic circumstances. Writing her a hand-read letter that she read out the other day on television that was never supposed to see the light of day. He wasn't doing it for any kind of promotional venture, but she took the decision to read out this letter because in her deep grief as a mother, losing Jamal, who worked tirelessly with Prince Charles for the Prince's Trust, was a wonderful ambassador for that, and a wonderful ambassador for this nation he was. She said it was one of the few things that was able to bring her some comfort, knowing, that the King in waiting took the time to write that letter, but also that the letter, she said, was so heartfelt and, it wasn't just 3 sentences, generic. It was truly about Jamal and his work. True thanks, delivered to her door by an aide with a great big spray of white flowers. And I'm just using that as one tiny example of the love that he puts into his work. I do believe that about him. I'm more than aware of many of the shortcomings of his, especially in the past. I'm more than aware, but we all have shortcomings. We can't all be Elizabeth II, can we? We just can't, but we can aspire to be, and that's what it's about. And I believe that he is aspiring to be like her, who aspired to be like Christ and like God. It all sort of goes up the ladder, doesn't it, to that prime example, that divine example. Charles gets that, and that's why you see that warmth radiate from the Holy Sun all the way down to the warmth of Charles's great big old sausagey hands there, making nice with the public. And that's why it's genuine and authentic. And that's why I'm glad that you realised it, dear, because it ends up with me. With me. Some fruit addressing my old fruits on a random YouTube channel. Life's a funny thing, isn't it? Thank you for your company. I hope you enjoyed today's broadcast. And if you did, my tip jar is in the description box below. And you're more than welcome to chuck a tuppence in there, my dear. Or you can leave me a juicy comment. Or you can blow me a kiss. And those two options are totally free. Isn't it marvellous? Be good. Not too good. Be fruity. But stay on royal duty. And channel the royal spirit at all times in this age of the Carolean. Toodle pip.